All right, well, thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm James Poviwa, and this is the January 9th, 2024 first meeting of the year for the Sustainable Economy Advisory Council. I am going to go ahead and call the roll call. James Poviwa, I am present. Daisy Maldonado.
Present.
Thank you. Patricia Knighton.
Present.
Thank you. Glenn Schiffbauer.
Present.
Thank you. Rob Black.
Present.
Thank you. Cassie Arias. Jonathan Perry. Mayani Barudin.
Present.
Thank you. Alexa Chavez.
I'm here.
Thank you. JT Willie. Wendy Atsity is excused. Janine Yazzie. Joe Little may be joining us shortly. And Marissa Naranjo. All right, well, thank you everybody who was able to jump on the call today. Our first item is to approve the agenda, which if you don't have it, I'm going to place into the chat right now. And our agenda is as followed. Roll call, approve agenda, approve minutes from December 13th, 2023. A presentation from Somos and Pueblo Unido and the University of New Mexico. A presentation on the New Mexico Match Fund. Policy recommendations for the 2024 legislature. Public comment, and we will adjourn after that. Any discussion about the agenda? If none, then I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Move to approve.
Thank you, Glenn. Second.
I'll
Second. Thank you, Patricia. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. And December 13th, 2023 notes. Kayla or Michael, do you have those posted or available? Have they been sent out?
Yes, they're posted.
Are you able to bring that up on the screen?
Yes, they were also in the meeting invite for our advisory council members.
Thank you.
I can pull it up. Oops.
Nope, I'm not seeing December 13th on here.
I see Joe Little here. Thank you for joining us, Joe.
Yeah, I don't see the meeting notes.
Can y'all see that now? Well, I gotta share screen. Those are the right ones. Yep.
They're up on the screen now. Thank you. Okay, so they are pretty straightforward, one page. Any discussion? Okay, thank you. Is there a motion to approve the notes from December?
Motion.
Thank you. Motion by Patricia, second.
Second.
Thank you by Glenn. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. So we will move on to our next agenda item, which I believe is a presentation by Somos and Pueblo Unido. So thank you to Somos for hosting the in-person portion of the meeting, and I will turn it over to you all.
Who's host?
Oh,
Could we present UNM and then have them screen share?
okay.
They're ready for it.
Thank you, James. We're gonna start. So Somos un Pueblo Unido has a quick presentation after UNM's Center for Social Policy presentation on some of the barriers that we have been through this study, as well as all of the interviews and work we've done in the last year to workforce development opportunities for folks in the Permian Basin.
She's sharing.
And so, in part, we've been, we've just been doing a lot of work with UNM to actually interview folks in southeastern New Mexico, as well as other disadvantaged workers. And so we wanted to start with the second half. We presented the first half on conditions for oil and gas workers a year ago, almost a year ago, before SEAC members. And now it's the second half that really delves into the workforce development landscape, as well as the aspirations, dreams, barriers of oil and gas workers in the Permian Basin for the transition and for their families. So we want to turn it over to Dr. Shannon Sanchez-Young.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. And Marcella, I have about 15 minutes?
Sure.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so as Marcella said, I'm going to be presenting today some of our findings from the second part of our study. And just to give people a little review, we've been working very closely with Somos over the last year to really try and do three things. First, we want to understand the attitudes and experiences and really the workplace conditions of the oil and gas workforce, as well as their families in southeastern New Mexico. And last year, that's a lot of what we presented to you. We're really also trying to understand the community's perceived current and long-term training needs, especially as New Mexico makes a transition to clean air energy. And the newer part of our report looks at the strengths and challenges of the current training landscape in the Permian Basin, drawing on the experiences and perceptions from local educators, workforce boards, and community-based organizations. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on our overall approach and sample. Just to say that, in this work, we've been really doing a directed convenience sample in close connection with Somos and their organizers. And we've been really trying to talk to employees and retired employees from oil and gas, and also those employees of the many industries that support the industry. But also, we've been really trying to hone in and try to understand the facilitators and barriers and hopes for those individuals who might be considered underemployed. And these often include stay-at-home mothers and increasingly youth. So I'm just going to kind of skip through our analytical approach. So for today, I'm really going to be focusing on some of our initial data that looks at the perceptions of the evolving and economic and employment context in the region, especially from the perceptions of those that are overemployed and underemployed. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the surprising findings that we've had about the digital landscape and people's perceived access and literacy for training. And then we're going to summarize some of residents' preferences for workforce development training based on these local contextual conditions. I'll just note that we are in the process of finalizing a final report that will also contain a much more clear picture of the landscape analysis, but we're still kind of working through those findings. So today we're going to really be focusing on the community's perceptions. So we just thought we'd begin by talking about some of the perceived economic and employment context in the region. And so I'll just start out by saying that this last fall, we did several focus groups. In fact, Diana was very involved in these groups, and we often co-facilitate them together. And we were able to do a survey. So this fall, we talked to about another 100 people in Hobbs, Artesia, but really, Somos did a really amazing job at helping us talk to people who really represent the region. So we had very wide participation. So the first theme that really came out, particularly in our qualitative analysis, is that it is pretty clear that oil and gas workers are very aware that their work is both unsustainable and unreliable. Consistently across our focus groups, we found this collective understanding that oil and gas work will likely disappear in the next 15 to 20 years. And here I've just given you sort of a representative quote from someone about their perception of this. And it's a pretty powerful quote, I think, because it says, Earth, all that is of Earth, is running out of natural resources such as oil. Yes, then yes, oil will leave the region. And when it ends, they will not be able to support us. They are all going to leave. So this quote represents this sort of collective view that while workers realize that the transition will be slow, there's a slow preparation going on in the community that this industry won't last forever. And there's a particular perspective that in the community, there needs to be some development towards thinking about what kinds of future the youth have. When we ask this via the survey, this is what the community largely thinks will happen in the region. They anticipate that there's going to be employment opportunities in these industries. Excuse me, guys. Sorry, I'm at home with my dogs. It's inevitable that they bark when I'm giving a talk. So as you'll see here, at least from the community's perception, they see that there will be more solar installation. They're hoping for manufacturing all the way down to wind turbine services. So from at least the community's perception, they do anticipate that newer industries are coming. Another critical theme that we're finding in our qualitative and quantitative work is that oil and gas workers really prefer targeted economic development to replace their reliance on oil and gas for jobs in the region. We were particularly struck in this particular round of focus groups because by and large, workers were pretty clear that they prefer large-scale economic development with little to no barriers to entry. In fact, a lot of people talked about the need to see things like large industries such as factories as a solution. And I think part of this stems from the fact that this sector, employees in this sector are keenly aware that in order to really recover jobs as we make the transition, that there needs to be some large-scale development because they just don't trust that renewable energy jobs will be as abundant or reliable compared to the oil and gas industry. So as you see here, one particular younger man said that while he really supports renewable energy in the region, He's concerned that it won't cover or sustain as many jobs as before. So while people are open to this, they are also concerned that the state really take efforts to promote industries that can employ lots of people. So when we did our groups this last fall, we really tried to hone into what it is that the underemployed workers in this region were perceiving. And so when we conducted our groups, we spoke with more women and more youth. And some of the themes that we're finding are as follows. First, there does seem to be, and I don't have quantitative data on this, so we're calling it a theme because this is what we heard in our focus group sessions. We're hearing that younger women who speak English do participate in the oil and gas workforce, some of them as administrative staff, such as clerks, and a small portion of these women also work as welders. What we by and large hear from these women is that while employment is stable, the conditions are not the best for women, and that oftentimes due to travel, lack of childcare, and long distances, it's very challenging for women to balance what's going on at home and in the workplace. Another important theme that we're uncovering is that female participants who do not speak English are primarily working in hospitality and often doing cooking and janitorial work. When we talk to women about what they would like to see for the future, it was very clear that by and large, women want to develop skills to work beyond these industries, that they are interested in flexible working schedules to accommodate their childcare needs. And they share an interest in pursuing work that can be done inside of their home, such as childcare, cosmetology, and catering. Yet the primary barrier for women is that they lack proper training and licensure. So we heard over and over and over again that women really, really want to move out of cleaning and would like to expand their skills. But due to low access to English-only classes and due to lack of childcare in the region, they're really struggling to make that happen, but certainly have the desire. We often found in our groups that women are feeling very isolated, and they're communicating, as I said before, a need for programs that support English language learning and skill development. So you'll see here some powerful quotes that represent some of these themes that we're finding. Particularly in Artesia, we're finding in smaller towns, women are saying that they would like to pursue English classes, but they have to drive to Roswell to make that happen. So between cleaning, childcare responsibilities, and work, this is increasingly difficult. You'll see in the middle here from someone who works in Hobbs as a clerk in the oil industry. They say that while the money is great, that for them, that it's akin to really feeling like they're enslaved in this workforce. So there was some very powerful discussions we had with both oil people in the oil industry who said that the curse of this is that you can work long hours and make lots of money, but there really is little time to figure out how to try to do something else or how to gain the skills to move outside of that workforce. We also are drawing from some survey results that we have that looked at younger adults in this region. And in this particular survey that was done kind of outside of this study in the last year, we talked to folks who were between the ages of 18 and 25. And one of the more encouraging things that we're finding in this survey is that younger adults are really expressing an interest in learning more about business entrepreneurship and other growth industries. And this was also echoed in some of our focus groups when youth were really trying and hoping for strategies that would take them away from the oil and gas industry and help them to do things that were more inclined or situated in the STEM field, or that might lead them towards entrepreneurship. So as you see here, when we ask people if they're interested in job training related to entrepreneurship, at least half or more than half are saying they are interested. And many of them, 50%, are interested in internships in careers in a growth industry. So clearly, while the youth see that their parents have been earning high wages, but working under terrible labor conditions, they're very ready and willing and hoping that they can move into different sectors. Now, the data also reveal that these younger adults between ages 18 and 35 are also concerned that growth industry jobs will just not materialize here. So as you see here, most of the respondents, the overwhelming majority, are either somewhat or very concerned that these will go to people who aren't from here, that they will only be available in urban areas, and that they just won't be given equal access. So what they're asking for and hoping for is that there can be more strategic planning for some of these opportunities to be targeted in this area. Okay, so let's talk quickly about the digital context. So when we started the study, we were very interested in really trying to understand whether, you hear it all the time, broadband access is very low in New Mexico. But when we posed this question in the southeastern region, we found that in reality, the majority of residents do have access to high-speed internet. And as you see here, a whopping almost 72% said yes. And even more surprising, at least to Gabe Sanchez and I, is that people really said that they had the skills necessary to use the internet to further their education or skills training. So as you see here, almost 85% said that they felt that they had the tools to really use the internet to advance their skills. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about training and education. So this was probably one of the most important and predominant findings of the second half of our study. There is no question about it. Oil and gas workers overwhelmingly support job training. But they are really, really clear that they're only able to participate in retraining efforts if they are in some way compensated. And part of this just stems from the simple fact that this workforce, while they work terrible long hours, they're used to earning a certain hourly wage, and they fear that they can't leave the industry without having some economic security, right? And that makes perfect rational sense. So they're willing and able, but they're highly supportive of training that would include some compensation for their time, because the bottom line is oil workers just don't feel like they can afford it otherwise. Now, while all workers predominantly, overwhelmingly said that being incentivized was crucial, they're also very open and willing to trying lots of different kinds of training opportunities. So we asked residents if they were willing to travel away from home for 3 to 4 weeks at a time to participate in training if they were compensated. And as you see here, an overwhelming majority said yes. So what that says to us is that it's crucial that state policies moving forward or workforce development strategies ought to consider how to reimburse people, and to also realize that this labor force is highly flexible. They're willing to travel away from home, and they're also willing to do a lot of training online. Now, as you see here, when we asked residents about what kinds of types of training they were interested in, what we are overwhelmingly finding is that folks are willing to try lots of different things, okay? So as you see here, we've highlighted in green the highest areas of modality, meaning these are the areas that people were really the most interested in. We saw that people were interested in building and construction training. Over and over and over again in our focus groups, we heard people talk about becoming electricians. People were very interested in training for jobs in manufacturing. And this makes a lot of sense. A lot of the current workforce there currently does work on working on oil pumps and does welding. So they're interested in converting those skills as the industry moves on. And people are very open for renewable energy manufacturing, weatherization training, wind turbine and solar installation and instructor training. Now you'll see here, there are other areas that just aren't that interesting to folks. People were particularly worried about nuclear energy and didn't feel that it was safe. And a smaller portion are interested in restoration and remediation. There is some well plugging going down in the region, and people certainly are interested in it as well. Residents, as I said earlier, really prefer flexible online courses, and they really are asking for a range of training that go from traditional college courses to basic education. Much to our surprise, we asked this question in both the first stage and the second stage of the survey. And you just don't ever see this in survey research, but we replicated it again. 100% of respondents said they would take job retraining programs if they were free and had convenient hours and locations. So just to reiterate, the community is willing, feels they have the literacy and would like the flexibility of online classes. They're highly supportive of on-the-job training. And what we really learned both in our survey and in our focus groups is that Southeastern workers and women and youth are keenly aware that training packages really need to cover everything, including things like adult basic education English classes, to traditional classes, to things like apprenticeships. So from the community's perspective, they really understand and hope that there can be integrated training models that are flexible and allow people to really have a holistic way to advance their skills in the region. Marcella, I think I'm probably low on time, huh?
You're okay. We'll go
Okay.
through this quickly.
Okay, cool. So, so that kind of summarizes where we're at with some of the worker views. We just want to hit some of the policy implications based on our surveys. And as you see here, and this is similar to what we found in wave 1 of our study, is that, you know, the community is really interested in the state taking a lead role in providing training for New Mexicans who want to work in clean energy industries, that it's critical that they continue to provide economic support for oil and gas workers. Sometimes this means including unemployment benefits, but in this newest round of research, what we're really seeing is that folks are saying, we're committed to living here, we don't want to leave our region, and we would like to be incentivized to stay here and to grow our families and to grow our skills here. Just to reiterate, even 95% of folks stay, they would like to stay in the region. And also, oil and gas workforce voices aren't being heard. So you have a committed labor force, people who are tied to the community, but they still feel like elected officials, by and large, are not hearing their voices. And finally, they really want to participate in the energy transition. People are really excited about rethinking what could happen in local towns as we see a shift away from this. And again, they're very, very interested in having their voices heard and being part of reshaping training activities that can be holistic and can serve both women, youth, and displaced oil workers. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Dr. Sanchez-Youngman. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Marcella. I was just going to thank you, Dr. Sanchez-Youngman, for the presentation and the joint report that you have conducted with Somos un Pueblo Unido. Marcella, did you want to pause and allow committee members any questions, or would you like to continue with your joint presentation?
I think if you can stay on, Shannon, we can just continue
Yeah.
and then questions at the end. Yeah. We want to, yeah. Is that
Great.
okay, James?
Absolutely.
Shall we launch?
Do you want me to share from here or?
Yeah, that's fine. I do just want to, on the tail end, so we did sort of a deep dive on where people are at with their current, assessing what their current skill set is, what their hopes and dreams are, what ideas they have for transition, barriers, etc. But a lot of the barriers that we've been able to see and that will also be a part of this report are some of the structural funding barriers and the workforce development infrastructure in the Permian Basin that is sorely lacking. And it's sorely lacking because everything is geared towards one industry for the most part. And so when you have everything geared towards one industry, what you start to see is not a lot of opportunities for adult basic or adult education, ESL classes, integrated education training programs, and things that have nothing to do with oil and gas, right? And so part of what we're looking at, not just through this report, but also the year and a half that we have spent really doing a deep dive on what workforce development structural barriers exist, that is that there just isn't enough. There isn't enough there aren't enough training programs. There aren't apprenticeship programs. There aren't pre-apprenticeship programs. There aren't enough career and technical education certification programs at the community colleges in this southeastern region that will allow folks to be able to prepare for a changing economy. And so that is what we're interested in seeing start to happen, particularly with a budget legislature where we see such a surplus of oil and gas money that comes precisely from these workers that are saying that they're being shut out of all of these opportunities. So that's kind of the context. So Somos un Pueblo Unido, for those who don't know, we're a statewide immigrant-based worker and racial justice organization. And so we've really been leaning into figuring out how to have folks from the immigrant community, BIPOC community, rural communities, and women have more equitable access and more worker voice in our workforce development infrastructure in the state. What we have seen is that there's a lot of really good and important and essential industry voice when it comes to workforce development programs and structures here in New Mexico, but we don't see workers actually at the table at these boards. And so what we want to do right now quickly is help SEAC members. Some of you already know this, but most of you, I suspect, don't. We want to kind of give you a lay of the land when it comes to how workforce development is currently being funded in our state and how that is problematic and how it is missing the mark when it comes to state investments to workforce development. And I know that in the past with other presentations, everyone says, as we have in the past, there isn't enough flexible funding that can augment WIOA dollars. We're going to explain to everyone exactly what that means and how we can create some interventions on that. This slide is just to remind folks, but really mostly Kayla, since she's new, as to how Somos Un Pueblo Unido has been engaged in this Just Transition campaign and all of the things that we have been pivotal in helping move forward in this state, including these two new wonderful positions that we have at EDD to focus on just transition initiatives. And so we know that there are a lot of different kinds of initiatives, but for us, workforce development and giving people that opportunity, especially for oil and gas workers and families and youth in the Permian Basin, are key to what we believe is necessary. And as we like to say, we would like to see some early and deep investments in the Permian Basin so that 10 years from now, 12 years from now, we have an economy to speak of and people are not once again displaced as immigrant workers because of climate issues. So that is where we're at. We can go to the next one.
For Shawnee raised her hand. Shawnee, something you want to flag?
Yeah, thank you, Michael, and thank you for the presentation, Marcella and UNM. We really appreciate all the work that you all have been doing, and we're really thrilled to move this forward again. Like, for investments to be made, we're really looking forward to seeing some action and recommendations be taken by the advisory council so we can take those recommendations to the task force, and then as well to be able to make those suggestions to our legislators to see where that funding is invested. But thank you for that.
Yes, that's what we're excited to be able to present today. So let's go to the second slide.
Can you go to the diagram, the next one?
Next one.
Yeah.
So again, we're sorry for those of you who already know this, but we know a lot of you don't. So we're going to just do a quick overview of how our current workforce development system is and where we see the barriers within the structure, within the structural and funding barriers of this. So I'm going to turn it over to Diana.
Thank you, Marcela. And so the workforce development system in New Mexico is, for those of you who may not know, is funded almost entirely by federal dollars, such as WIOA. And so this Title I funding is distributed to workforce development boards across the state. We have 4, which is distributed by the Department of Workforce Solutions, who manages this WIOA money. And so these department boards include Workforce Connection one-stop offices, support services, and they also re-grant for training providers. And so we've had some conversations with them as well. And so if you can see on the right side, there's also WIOA Title II funding, which funds the higher education department for adult education programs that a lot of our members really do contribute from. And so we see approximately 26 million for that Title I WIOA funding, in which 15% is retained from the governor for workforce development priorities, and 85% of that 26 million is distributed to these boards. And so for the higher education department, we see that Title II WIOA funding is 5 million from WIOA, and we do have a state match, which is an additional 5 million. And so we see adult education programs be funded through here, which include community colleges, adult learning centers, and nonprofit organizations who also support in that way. And then it comes to our workforce in the state of New Mexico. I don't know if Marcelo wants to add anything else, Rob? Okay, for our next slide, I'm going to talk to you a little bit of why we think it's critical to fund adult education programs under the higher education department. And so we talked earlier, and Shannon spoke a little bit on this, on the importance of having innovative programs. And we believe that these holistic approaches of being able to combine some practical type of skills building programs for our communities will really help them and integrate them into these programs. And so we feel like if we really do fund these type of programs, we're able to see those big integrations. And so, for example, integrated education training programs are housed under the adult education. These type of programs, for example, are critical for our community members, and we've heard through them, through the surveys that we have done. And so our community members tell us if they were able to even access these type of training programs through those adult education departments, they would be super interested in them because they would maybe even be able to receive their GED degree and also get certified in a sector industry, recognized industry. And so this is a great way to integrate our workforce into these new growth sectors that have been identified by the Economic Development Department and also the Department of Workforce Solutions through their WIOA state plan development. And so we have the data that's backing all of this up, and we believe that these integrated education training programs will really do be that integration that we need into our workforce.
I just want to add that the Adult Education Division in New Mexico under the Higher Education Department estimates that 17% of New Mexicans across the board are considered adults, are considered low literacy. And so, and then we have a very high percentage of adults who do not have high school diplomas. And so the on-ramp to certification programs and re-entering or more formally entering the workforce to help meet the needs of all of this, job shortages that we're currently experiencing here in New Mexico. Often the on-ramp for both adult English language learners as well as low literacy, folks with low literacy or who don't have high school diplomas is adult ed. And so the integrated education training programs is the link between that on-ramp and some of the more traditional career and technical education training programs that are being offered and that should be continued, that should continue to grow in New Mexico and through the community colleges. And so we can see, and there is an LFC recommendation for a tremendous increase, which is wonderful, of career and technical education training, but without also funding or using some of that funding for adult education as one of the main on-ramps and integrated education training programs, we're going to be missing a lot of disadvantaged workers who are already in our workforce or who are underemployed in our workforce who could be entering some of these important industries.
And so these are our 4 regional workforce development boards that I talked about earlier, who receive the funding and provide these type of services to our communities. And so we have the Northern Board, we have the Central Board, and the South and Eastern Board. These boards are, as I said, they run various programs, including the Workforce Connection one-stop offices that we've heard about, the support services, and they also re-grant to these training providers. And so they serve 4 types of population groups. That would be our youth, our adult and dislocated worker, and then the employer as well.
Map is flipped in Southwest.
Thank you. And so we talked a bit about this earlier. And so Title I and Title II funding covers, for example, Title I covers adult, dislocated worker, and our youth, which we usually see throughout the workforce boards. And then there's our Title II funding that goes to our adult education literacy programs, in which they do receive the additional $5 million state match funds. And yeah, these are some of the growth sectors I spoke about earlier in which we could really benefit from the integrated education programs and be able to integrate our workforce into these type of programs. And so there's the EDD's economic state plan in which they identified those sectors. And then we have our Department of Workforce Solutions, our state plan, who also identified 6 priority growth sectors in the state. And we heard from our community members throughout our surveys that they would love to participate in these type of programs if they were available and these industries. And so we could see that they're also part of our state's priorities. And we want to make sure that our communities are included in these growing sectors.
Can you actually read out the WIO estate plan? So the WIO estate plan gets updated every 4 years. And so it hasn't been officially adopted yet, but it's pretty much in its final stages of getting adopted for the new 4-year state WIOA plan, which our organization and members from Somos Un Pueblo Unido in the Southeast participated in, as well as from Northern New Mexico. And so part of their state plan strategies. And we just want to remind folks that DWS, or the Department of Workforce Solutions, has identified, they are basically saying that there are 35,000 jobs right now that need to be filled and that are unfilled. And that there are about 15,000 workers who are unemployed or underemployed who need to be more fully employed within that system. Now, a lot of Somos Un Pueblo Unido members are a part of this unemployed category or underemployed category, like Shannon was talking about, women, for instance, in the Southeast, who might have some side jobs as house cleaners or housekeepers, but would like to be more formally integrated into the workforce. Well, they want to be more formally integrated into the workforce, and the state needs them to be more formally integrated into the workforce. But there are these major gaps in workforce development and career technical education, integrated education training, et cetera. So what's interesting is, and I know that this is getting updated probably by Kayla by the end of the week. This is the EDD's plan in the 9 sectors, but the DWS has gone further and has identified these sectors that they want to focus on. And they are health and behavioral health care, not a surprise to anyone, early childhood education and care. It's a big problem in southeastern New Mexico. We have a lot of subsidies for childcare, but any one of our members, and this isn't just in southeastern New Mexico, would say we just don't have the providers. We don't have daycare centers. We don't have home daycare centers. And we have a lot of, particularly women, it's not just exclusive to women, but mostly women of color and a lot of immigrant women who are poised and ready to get some of these certification programs if these integrated education training programs existed. I'm going to tell you right now that there's some really great childcare provision certification programs and trainings in Santa Fe and in Albuquerque. There are none in southeastern New Mexico that our people have access to. Yes.
The workers you referred to earlier, are they included in the 35,000?
That's a really great question. Well, the 15,000 of underemployed or unemployed. Immigrant workers who are undocumented and who've never been a part of the formal unemployment system are not. So no. So that goes to show that if we actually target and we don't just have to target immigrants or undocumented immigrants, although they are a vital part of our workforce, and should be integrated and targeted, which is Somos Un Pueblo Unido's job, is to make sure that happens. But it's a lot of other disadvantaged, or what DWS calls difficult to reach workers, that they're trying to bring in to the workforce in these sectors. So the other one is natural resources management, first responders, construction industries, and broadband expansion. So these are the structural problems. So a lot of what Shannon talked about really goes to both in the first half of the study, which focused on the deplorable conditions for the oil and gas industry for workers and for their families, and the problems that it has been having for their health and their lives in general, is that in addition to the social infrastructure, lack of childcare, lack of access, there are some deeply embedded structural issues in our funding system for WIOA dollars that we need to correct. And we can correct it with some state investments, which is what we've been really pushing, and hope that we can get support from SEAC today in doing. So the barriers that we've been able to identify, the structural barriers, and some of this has been alluded to in past presentations to SEAC, is that WIOA funding is highly restrictive, and it excludes many New Mexicans based on age, immigration status, income levels. As Diana had mentioned, there are funding categories, particularly with Title I, to go to the workforce development boards. It's adult, dislocated worker, and youth. If you spend all of your money on the youth and there's no additional funding, then you have to turn people away, even if you have a really robust youth program. And you can't use funding from dislocated worker or adult categories to help fund that. So the way that WIOA money is structured, it doesn't really allow for a lot of innovation and for broad inclusion of workers that are currently excluded as a result of all the funding categories. And we also just want to let you know that undocumented workers are entirely excluded. They cannot access any of the stipends, the needs support payments, the trainings, the apprenticeship programs. And so that is really problematic when you have a growing undocumented workforce, for instance, in places like the Permian Basin, where we've actually seen increases of population in contrast in the last 10 years to all of the other counties that are not in the Southeast, that have seen stagnant population or reduction of population in the last 10 years. The other problem with WIOA funding is that it fluctuates year to year based on congressional appropriations. We've seen a decrease in funding over the last decade to come to our states. We also see that the boards, so our money is distributed and redistributed, as Diana said, to the regional boards that are really there to meet regional needs with industry, with community colleges, with worker-based organizations, with apprenticeship programs, with community-based workforce development programs. And so unfortunately, they don't have a lot of flexibility in the funding. And so they lack funding when it comes to expanding eligibility, creating innovative programs, giving more money to the programs that are working in their communities, to expand them, and then to innovate new programs that create regional approaches, sectoral approaches, or that target groups like immigrants, for instance. And so they also lack funding to develop meaningful sectoral and regional partnerships with actual disadvantaged workers in the community-based organizations that represent them. And without access to and input from workers, you're really not going to have a system that makes, it'll be functional to a certain degree, but it's going to miss the mark. And that's why we've been so focused on really trying to find out with UNM what the workers are saying their needs are, and then how we can match them with the industries. Millions of dollars of federal funding for workforce development, but the boards lack the capacity from the federal level, they lack the capacity to apply for them and to administer them. And I know that there's going to be another presentation about, all the federal funding that is coming or that can come. A lot of that federal funding is and can be used for workforce development programs through the BIL and the IRA. But when you have an inherently discriminatory and non-innovative structure in place, then you're just throwing more money at programs that are missing the mark when it comes to worker equity. And then
Thanks, Marcella. I just want to be mindful of time as we are at 5 past the hour and we generally go to 4:30.
Okay, I'm almost done. Do you want us to stop?
No,
Okay.
I just was giving us all a time check. That's it.
Okay, no worries. And then the Title II money, the Adult Education Division funds are, we said that that's 10 million, but it is also based on a strict funding formula that does not allow for regional or sectoral approaches. The example we always give is, in Carlsbad, they have really great adult ed and ESL classes. And they really are meeting the needs of people where they're at. So they have a 5 o'clock class and a 7 o'clock class for people who are in the industry who are getting off of work at 7. As a result of meeting people where they're at, they have a 100-person waiting list for ESL classes at the Carlsbad Community College. Adult education cannot give them money because of their strict funding formula, because it's based on HED's funding formula, and so they cannot give them the extra money to do that. And then WIOA doesn't cover extra support services adequately to cover childcare, transportation, living stipends, digital access, supplemental income, and equipment. So we know that there are lots of opportunities right now. This new 4-year state plan federal money coming in for infrastructure jobs and green energy, even though we know we don't have the workers, sufficient workers in New Mexico to meet those needs. We have new projects emerging, and of course, we have the $3.6 billion and push for diversification. Go to the next one. What we think is important in this legislature and what we're pushing for is funding to help increase at least by 50% through innovative grant programs through DWS to the workforce development boards. Now, the workforce development boards are not perfect, but that is the structure we have in place right now for providing support and opportunities to communities, particularly in rural communities, to access some of the programs that do exist and then to innovate. So they don't have any, they don't have any non-WIOA funding, and it's really important that we're able to get them state dollars to be able to innovate and expand their work. And then we also think that more funding, state funding that's flexible and that's not a part of the WIOA system and the WIOA match go for adult education programs in higher education department. There is this $80 million ask for career and technical education, which is great. We need to make sure that some of that goes to the adult education programs to actually meet the needs of folks who are on-ramping to those certification programs through adult ed. And then we also think that there needs to be funding through some of the pilot funding that will be made available, hopefully, if it passes in this next legislative session, for supplemental income or other, we call it guaranteed income, but it's not unprecedented in the workforce development world. What we know is that people cannot attend a 6-week certification program or cannot come to Santa Fe for broadband splicing program if they don't have supplemental income, so that they may not have to pick up that extra shift at work, or that they can actually go home after 8 hours and then do a class. And so we need to be able to help supplement their income through a state administered program. And we think that HSD, which is, I think, going to be the new health authority, is in the perfect place and position to do that. So that's what we are asking for and pushing this legislature to support with their funding to help deal with some of those structural barriers.
Marcella, thank you so much.
And that's
Excellent. That's really incredible. And you have one last slide. I don't want to, I'm not intending to cut you off. So if there's more on this.
DWS is going to be presenting before the House Appropriations Committee on the 17th. So stay tuned for that. And then we're having Workers' Day of Action on January 22nd. And organizations from across the state will be there to help push for equity in the workforce development system.
Thank you. Wonderful. So in just a few sentences to recap, what is the specific request from Somos of SEAC in terms of support?
Well, we need support in and of additional funding, flexible funding we're asking for a 50% increase over what they're getting from WIOA. But who knows what that will look like. We're not actually running a piece of legislation. We're asking for this money through HB2. And that is for funding for adult ed and integrated education training programs outside of the WIOA system. It was that last slide, or the penultimate slide. Money.
Let's go back to the.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Find it again.
No problem. Thanks, Michael. Appreciate it.
They're very specific. More money, flexible funding for workforce development boards, flexible funding for HED, adult ed, specifically for adult ed, and then income support through a pilot program, income support for folks who are training. And it won't be everybody, but it's just to kind of get a pilot program going for people who are in training programs in sectors that are experiencing shortages right now. And the training can be, for instance, for industry recognized credentials through career technical education.
Screen share.
That's it. So he's having a hard time
here it
screen
is.
sharing, but
Got
those
it.
are the 3 things
Sorry.
that we're pushing for.
Just go back.
Okay, is there you said 50% increase in WIOA funding. What is there a specific number?
We're saying 20 to 25 million for all three of these things. Yeah, but there is not a specific number at this point. There's a lot of money in this LFC budget, which of course will get renegotiated for workforce development. So the key is to make sure that some of that funding goes to these three things. We don't want to under ask.
Well, it's all really exciting. I want to, highlight that we invited you to speak to SEAC, as you were saying, about a year ago on the preliminary report that you've been working on with UNM and Dr. Sanchez-Youngman's team. So it's really great to have you back with these concrete recommendations and requests for support. In terms, I'll open it up to questions from the council. And then we also have one additional presentation. And then we were potentially going to take action on legislative recommendations. So any questions from council members? I did see that in the chat there was a request to please provide the slide deck to SEAC and Setforce. So if you could please do that today, that'd be great.
So James, I'll go. This is Rob. You said you didn't want to under ask. Your ask is for 20 to 25. You remember I was asking for $500 million, so I feel like you're under asking.
I know.
But I was pleased to see that there's 80 million set aside, but it's 80 million over 4 years.
Right.
And our understanding is that there is no good vehicle at the moment on how they're planning on doing that. But we are optimistic that something positive, hopefully on at least a pilot level, we can get done this year.
That's
if
right.
not something more permanent, where we're able to fund these sort of programs on a more permanent basis and take that pressure off the general fund, but do it in a way that provides those sort of resources that allow for an individual who needs support to be able to be part of those sort of training programs. And as I think I can't remember if it was probably the November meeting is when I talked about the chamber's perspective on this, which I do think aligns very closely with a lot of the things you talked about today. So I look forward to working with you this session. I'm trying to make sure that we have access to those fundings for those upskilling opportunities for individuals, whether they're coming out of high school or they're returning into the workforce, or they need to upskill in an existing environment. So thanks for the presentation. I did have a quick question, and I had to jump. I was kind of in a couple of things during the presentation from UNM, and I just wanted to, did you talk about how you identified who was going to be involved in the qualitative and quantitative and how you identified those individuals?
No, we didn't today, but I could thank you for the question. Given that this is a hard to reach population, we did a targeted sampling strategy, and we actually worked closely with Somos to identify people in the region that don't typically respond to surveys. So it is a convenience sample. In all, we spoke with around 100 people, which is a small sample, but we're really talking to folks who don't typically respond to inquiries. This last round in our focus groups, we talked to over 38 people, and we had really good representation from that region. And I think in total, we've talked to about, let me pull up my slides. But it is a convenient sample.
So
So
I
we
guess
have to be
that's one thing
careful.
that I guess I have some concerns with,
Yeah, yeah,
is that it's a very small sample
yes.
and it's individually identified. And so to extrapolate that to a broader population base in the Southeast or anywhere seems problematic on a reliance cell. I mean, I can get it for, a very unique part of the population, but I am concerned that the information comes across as this is how it is in Southeast New Mexico,
Mhm.
and it is not a representative sample, is what I'm hearing you say.
You know, you're absolutely technically correct on that. And when we write up the final report, we're very, very clear about that in our findings. We've done a couple of these studies, and what we do here, Rob, is we look for saturation. And I'm pretty confident, I mean, I'm a qual researcher. I'm confident on the qualitative side that we're seeing a lot of similar themes. But you're right. We are primarily talking to those people in the Southeast who are the most marginalized and who are accessing things the least. Does that translate to every person in that region? No. But we are speaking to that specific group. And we'll be careful in our findings. You're right.
And I appreciate that. And I think that is really important to add voice to that group.
Yes.
But I think it's also very important to understand that there are a lot of folks who, frankly, in that part of the world are under-resourced, underserviced, that fall outside of the targeted area you're in. And so I am worried that gives, unless we're careful, we disproportion kind of resource allocation in a way that misses folks still that aren't being selected for that particular sample. So that's where my concern falls on this. And so I appreciate your comments regarding ensuring that the final reports are structured in a way that articulates that. But it is a concern about when we get that specific and we hand select our group, the data that comes out of that is, for me, it's harder to trust, to be honest.
Can I just add, Rob, that we were very clear that, so Somos is an immigrant-based organization, and so we had no intention, like the intention of this was to see what immigrant oil and gas workers. So we've just been very clear, I think, from the beginning that we're talking about immigrant oil and gas workers, right? So this is folks that most people kind of ignore. And so our big thing in the last 2 years was to elevate the fact that that 55% of energy workers in New Mexico, according to DWS, are people of color, and that 46% are Latino, most of whom are Latino immigrants in this particular region of the state. And so we really, like most legislators, you knew this, of course, because you come from the Southeast, but most legislators didn't. Most Democrats in Albuquerque, Santa Fe, and Las Cruces didn't really know who these sort of vulnerable immigrant oil and gas workers were, and how important they were to the industry. So we've just made we've just been pretty clear. So I appreciate that too, but we've been pretty clear. This is who we're talking about. And so we always say, if you can raise the floor for the least advantaged workers, you can kind of raise the floor for everyone. And one of the other things that we've been doing, in addition to the qualitative that we are so clear is focused on immigrant oil and gas workers in southeastern New Mexico. This isn't even immigrant oil and gas workers in the Farmington area, because our members really had worked a lot in that industry in previous years. And that is that in talking to, because we've been doing a lot of interviews to help understand the structural barriers with higher ed, adult ed, and with the workforce development boards, is that they're drawing connections to how other disadvantaged workers are not having access to the workforce development system. So I just wanted to put that out there, because But we.
Thank you.
I think that's fair,
promise you,
and you've
never-
certainly
we never
educated
say we're
me.
talking on behalf of all oil and gas workers, just this particular set.
No, and I appreciate you saying that, and I also want to be very clear that you've educated me about unique barriers that I was frankly ignorant of, and I appreciate that because I think that certainly broadens how the chamber has thought about our proposals and ensuring that we are allowing access to the economy for more people. It is how we think about it. So I totally get that. I just want to make sure that when we talk about what we're saying, we're being accurate.
We will do
Thank
that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And final call for questions on this or comments from council members. Okay, cool. So Patricia, were you coming off?
Actually, I was gonna say I have no comments, but I thought I saw Glenn raise his hand.
Glenn?
There he goes. But thank you for the presentation all.
Yeah, it's a great presentation and I know we're running tight. I just had one quick question as you were going through the presentation that we all, there's many New Mexico workers that are excluded because of these restrictions that, and do we have a feel for how many workers that number might be?
The WIOA restrictions, no, but I can, it's in part because of the way the funding and Rob knows this as well, because we've had discussions about this. It's the way that the funding is siloed or the way that it's categorized. And so for instance, the youth program and the youth funding is for 14 to 24-year-olds, and they have to meet X, Y, and Z needs in order to qualify for a program under WIOA dollars. And so that leaves people who are, who age out of it or who don't have the right income requirements. And so instead of being more robust and being bigger tent to bring more people into the workforce to meet industry demands, they get shut out. So it's hard to know how many people are turned away as a result of the WIOA restrictions. Right. It's also hard to know how many programs don't get started because of the WIOA restrictions to meet the needs of these folks in our communities.
Right. You can't know what's not happening. That's hard to quantify. Thanks.
Thank you. I did have a question in terms of the agenda before we make a decision on what we're doing here. Who is doing the presentation on the New Mexico Match Fund?
James, I would do that. I think I got a 2-minute version of that.
Okay. Sorry, a how long version?
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Okay, well, if it is 2 minutes, let's go to that. And then I want to come back and consider whether we will take any action in terms of support for either things.
Okay.
So why don't we go ahead, Michael?
Great, thanks, James. Just wanted to make folks aware of a proposal before the legislature that is on the governor's executive budget proposal. And it is for a $100 million match fund. This is to overcome some of the barriers that local communities, primarily rural communities, are facing in terms of applying for federal funds. And just to be clear, this is only one part of the problem that rural communities are facing in accessing these dollars as we're trying to get capital in there for economic development and infrastructure and other things. What the proposal would do is provide it would be a rolling application for local communities to apply for matching funds, to apply for the IRA, infrastructure bill, and other federal programs. And so any entity that's eligible for state funding could apply for it. It would also be able to be used for offsetting higher project costs that because of inflation, a lot of prices will keep going up. And so it would allow communities to be able to do that. In addition, there's 5% could be used for administering the grant, and that's 5% of the total grant, not just of the matching fund. So whatever the federal amount is, plus the state matching, 5% can be used for administering the grant, which is also a big issue for communities because they don't have the resources to be able to see the projects through once they actually get the funding. So there is no bill as of yet. Meredith Dixon, we understand, will be the bill sponsor, so we're waiting to see bill language. But as I mentioned, it is on the executive budget proposal. And so, yeah, there will be more to come on that. But this is something that could be really, really important in terms of supporting rural communities.
Thank you. Where would it be housed?
I'm sorry, it would be housed at DFA. So there's already kind of a pilot for match grant fund of $10 million. That was for 1 year. This would be for $100 million.
Thank you. Does it need legislation, or is it simply the budget line item?
I think it is going to need accompanying legislation to direct how it gets used. Yeah, so we're waiting to see that.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any recommendations in terms of support that SEAC could offer, or yeah, any thoughts on that?
Yes, I think definitely, I mean, basically supporting the legislation once it comes out in whatever form. We can keep people informed on what that looks like when it comes out.
Do you want to add that LFC's recommendation is significantly lower?
Oh, yes, found that out today. LFC's recommendation, as Marcella just said, is significantly lower. I think it's $20 million is what they're proposing. Yeah. So yes, we're hoping it's closer to the executive's version.
Excellent. Okay, thank you for that information. Are there any questions on that from council members? Okay, thank you. So, thank you.
Recommendations that are broad since we don't have specific legislation.
So the next item on the agenda is policy recommendations for 2024 legislature. This should be considered a action item. If there is, my suggestion, if there is a motion to support the, well, we'll start with the presentation and requests that Somos had. I'm struggling a little here because I'm missing that slide and I don't quite know what the motion, how to craft a motion for that. I also am the chair, so I shouldn't. I guess I would say as chair, I would entertain a motion to, as whoever wants to propose it, for Somos's request here. So Mayani, Counselor?
Yeah, not to overcomplicate the process, I'm just curious how we want to go about providing support for all of the legislation, if it would be overall, SEAC recommendations, including the Somos proposal on the match fund increase, but also just to assess the other bills that will be filed within the next week. I don't know how we could do that, even a smaller task force focus on legislation, or just figure out what our processes will be, since it's going to move so quickly, and will be over before I think our next meeting will be able to organize our efforts beforehand. So yeah, just curious, how we can go about doing that. If we want to consolidate everything into one package or individual motions.
Yeah, appreciate that. That's a very good question. I've been thinking about it as well. Last year, one thing that we did do was a special meeting to support one particular piece of legislation, which we were able to, I think, make a statement on. I think that we can look at other pieces of legislation that may come up that are pertinent to SEAC. The opportunity, I think, here is, since we've already had one presentation that's pretty robust on increasing funding for WIOA in very specific ways. that we could just vote to support that and also in the next week or so be open to reviewing other legislation?
So. Speak. I mean, I'm not on the committee, but I have suggestions.
Sure, Marcella, thanks.
No,
Just really
it's-
quick, is there anything, any thoughts from any council members on this? But yeah, Marcella, in lieu of that, yeah, any suggestions?
You know, a lot of this funding, I mean, I think about what the role of SEAC is, you know, which is still sort of constantly being honed. And I think that that Kayla on Just Transition's behalf is gonna be, is putting together a presentation on EDD, is gonna be meeting with her new interim secretary for EDD. And so a lot of this stuff really is conceptual. It's like these broad concepts of what we want to see come out of the budget, which is kind of HB2. Some of it needs enabling legislation, a lot of it doesn't. And I think about, for instance, the 80 million that is in there for career and technical education. Like I would want to support that if I were on SEAC, right? And so how do you, instead of supporting specific legislation or 100 million that's in the executive budget for the matching grants, is it saying we don't support 20 million, we support 100 million? Or can you actually create more of a statement of directive to Set Force and to EDD saying these are the things that we think are important? More money to augment WIOA for the boards, more for HED, more for community colleges to invest in career and technical education, more for matching funds, more conceptual things rather than individual pieces of legislation. Unless, as Mayani said, there are legislation that you guys want to support in addition to these big funding requests. It's just the sausage making of the budget makes it difficult to say we endorse this.
Sure. I know, Rob, you're ahead, but if you don't mind, we're going to go to Shawnee.
Go ahead and let Shawnee go.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think that Marcella makes a strong case that the advisory council could absolutely look at doing a statement that was kind of more conceptual and blanketed, and that's something that we can use to inform the state plan and like the direction of the economic transition funds moving forward, and some of the other economic transition, like that entire 50 million special appropriation. If there was some sort of statement from the advisory council that looked at that, we'd be able to kind of use that to inform programming. And then of course, when it got specific and came to legislation, that would be the point at which we would need to get specific about how to, if the advisory council wanted to vote to support specific legislation. But even doing a blanketed statement that was more general we can still use that in some way. But I think that being able to speak specifically to legislation is also just a little bit stronger when it comes time to like funding.
Okay, thank you, Chair Harvey. So to move us along, I am going to rephrase and say the chair would entertain a motion to draft a statement of support that highlights the pieces of policy recommendations that have been presented to SEAC over the last year. I know that was wordy.
Yeah, James, I actually would not support that because I don't even know what that means. I mean, it's so broad. And there's been a lot of presentations, so I would feel uncomfortable kind of giving that kind of scope.
With the caveat that we review it, come back and vote on whether we're going to approve that. So sorry, maybe I'm drafting that statement and reviewing it.
Okay. I mean, I guess I would be comfortable. I was just trying to figure out how to write this with at least in regards to, because obviously I came forward in November, presented on something very similar to what Somos presented on today. I would feel comfortable, and I do think it is a major issue around equity and access to the economy, especially as we transition, that we fill the gaps that exist in our higher education systems that help people get into these high demand careers and be able to sustain their communities and their families. And we've identified those gaps as career technical education certifications that are not part of a 2 or 4 year degree, that folks who have a different residency or immigration status aren't eligible for those programs. So I wish I had a couple of, a minute or two to write it, but I would say I would put forward a motion that seeks support additional career technical education funding that allows for non-degree granting or non-credit based certifications to be funded by the state and scholarships to be funded and making it so that, and this could be cleaned up, but making it so that it's structured in a way that allows folks with varying immigration status to participate in those programs.
I appreciate that. Thanks, Rob. Let's do this. I don't think we can take action on anything today.
Sure.
And so
I'll withdraw my terrible motion because it was really inarticulate.
It's actually very good.
We like that motion. We'd add a little bit to it, but.
What I'd like to do is work with council members and staff over the next couple of days to draft a statement similar to what Rob and Marcella and others have suggested. And I'll work with staff to figure out when we can do another SEAC meeting that will be, outside of our ordinary schedule to review and take action on that statement. What do council members, do you like that idea? That's what I'd like to do.
Yes.
Yes, this is Daisy. I would appreciate that. And if we could actually get those presentations, that actually would help me as well. We will feel more comfortable about what we're going to be supporting.
We can do that. And Rob, do you have your hands down? Great.
I have a thing. Just on, sorry, I need to be recognized, but I do it's quick about a $300 million investment that they're looking at.
Sure.
Yeah, so there's an additional LFC recommendation for a $300 million government and accountability trust fund that would go to also pilot projects in public education and workforce development and child well-being. And so the part of the reason of creating a broader, more conceptual, like these are the things that need, is that these are the things that need to be looked at within the workforce development or just transition or whatever, whatever you want to put in that larger recommendation, is that it's for things that have already been identified, like the 80 million and things that are already being talked about specifically, but it's also as direction and support for things that are still unnamed in these big funding trust funds. And so again, LFC has said, we want that 300 million to go to innovative and pilot programs, including in workforce development. And so having broader conceptual ideas, I think, like a la what Rob Black was saying, would be helpful in being able to use that during the session.
Great. Excellent. Thank you all. We're gonna move along since we did get started about 10 minutes late, so we're technically not too far off schedule. I am gonna move us to public comment. And I know there was at least one question among attendees. Is that right, Kayla?
Kayla stepped away. It's yes, and it was Tom Singer.
Sure. So Tom is in the attendees, so maybe he can be brought in to the or taken off mute or whatever.
Okay,
Yeah, I don't want to hold folks up, and James, I sent you an email about this, but just let me say for the benefit of everybody here that Southwestern Public Service, which is a subsidiary of Xcel Energy, put out a new IRP, Integrated Resource Plan, this year that forecasts a doubling of their generation. They need to double their size to serve the oil and gas industry. And there's tremendous opportunity to engage the utility itself, either on their own workforce plan, training and all the kinds of programs you're talking about, but also to structure their request for proposals for generation capacity to require their vendors, the companies that will build solar projects and transmission, to structure their RFPs and their proposals to include this kind of stuff like community benefits agreements. So I'm happy to work with the SEAC or any individual member on this. But there's a renewables boom around the bend. It won't be as big as oil and gas, but they're going to need a lot of people with a lot of new skills.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate that. Any other questions, comments from the public? Which I think we have 3 folks, and whoever else might be in the room. Okay, hearing none, entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. This is Rob.
Second.
Thank you, Patricia. All in favor?
Aye.
Excellent. Thank you all. We'll be in touch, and thank you to Somos for hosting. We will see you guys soon. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.